What's going on, y'all? Crash here with another exciting episode of Forgotten Library games we've never played. Today we're going to cover a game called Deponia. I do need to note that there are currently 4 games in the Deponia series, however this video will only be covering the first game. So if you do want me to cover the entire library of the Deponia series, let me know in the comments and we'll work out when those videos can be done. And of course, if you like today's video, please be sure to like, comment, and or subscribe, as it does help this channel and does allow me to continue doing this. With that said, let's get to it. Deponia was originally released in Germany in January of 2012 by Daedalic Entertainment, themselves a German developer. The game was met with mixed to high reviews by traditional gaming publications and was released in both North America and the EU later in the year. I was unable to find standalone sales data for the first installment, which is what we're covering today. However, I did find the series as a whole sold about 2.2 million copies, the overwhelming majority of which were deeply discounted, per Daedalic CEO Carsten Fichtelmann. Yes, I am aware I completely butchered that pronunciation, but bear with me. I included these reviews because my opinion may not match public consensus, and that's fine. I just wanted something from outside this video to compare my findings to. I'm not the end-all be-all to what a good game is, and I don't expect people to think as much. These are simply my opinions at the end of the day, and I encourage people to make up their own minds. With that, let's move on to my first impressions. This game honestly managed to piss me off within the first 5 minutes, to the point where I almost scrapped this video before I rolled footage. The music was blaringly loud even at low volume, and the menu options took a couple of clicks to open. Once I got into the settings, I realized I couldn't move the game to my capture screen, which presented a minor annoyance I had to work around. I haven't even started, and we were already off to a pretty bad start, but I decided to go forward and start the game anyway. I didn't realize until I was editing this video that the selection screen at the start is for the 3 games included in the complete journey, with the 1, 4, and 7 representing the starting chapter in each game. This is never explained in the game. When you begin a chapter, you finally start with a tutorial telling you the basic interactions. Easy stuff, mostly point and click. My main takeaway from this was that the game would be puzzle oriented. To be fair, this game is marketed as an interactive graphic novel, so I wasn't expecting anything fancy. However, I did immediately notice the poor recording quality of the voice acting. Let's listen.
Yeah, well, yes. But the junk press broke down, and we thought we'd use the time for a little tutorial.
Who thought that? I don't need no stinking tutorials.
Things were about to get even more frustrating though, as I finally decided to enter the main part of the game. Our story begins on the planet of Deponia, a planet that is riddled with trash since the majority of the population had ascended to a station called Elysium, hovering just above said planet. We focus on our main character Rufus, a resident of Kuvak, a settlement on Deponia, and the son of the only known person to leave Deponia since the ascension occurred. Rufus is packing, planning to depart Deponia forever. He's built his own rocket to get to Elysium. During this packing sequence, you realize your choices don't matter in this game, and this is the opportunity I'd like to take to point out that we will be skipping the side dialogue in this video. The dialogue is entertaining, but ultimately doesn't affect the outcome of the story. If you are curious as to what that dialogue is, I would recommend going back and checking it out. We cut over to Rufus being confronted by his ex-girlfriend Tony before he leaves. She decides to accost him for being a bum in her house for the last year. Before she gets a chance to finish, she says he's leaving for good, lights the fuse, and enters his pod. Unfortunately for Rufus, this goes horribly wrong, much to Tony's delight, and he ends up getting yanked by his leg up into the air. When he finally stops, Rufus ends up on an Organon cruiser. The Organon are a robotic race of complete dicks who use their ships to terrorize the Deponians and dump trash all over them. While on board, Rufus sees a young woman named Goal being chased by the Organon after she learns the Organon have been covering up that there's still human life on Deponia for generations. Bailiff Argus, aka Wish Darth Vader, threatens Goal to keep her quiet, which prompts Rufus to try and rescue her. Although seemingly well-intentioned, this too goes horribly wrong, and both of them end up being tossed off the ship. Rufus eventually lands back in Kuvak and learns Goal is unconscious. The rest of the chapter basically revolves around Rufus trying to gather materials to wake Goal, which essentially ends up being just a bunch of puzzles for the next hour, hour and a half. To be fair, between landing in Kuvak and waking Goal, there is stuff that happens, but nothing that's relevant to the main plot line, so it's not being covered in this video. Rufus does eventually manage to wake Goal, although during the dialogue we learn that Rufus has less than honorable intentions concerning the girl. At least that was my perception of Rufus's dialogue by today's standards. It becomes obvious that Goal has some kind of brain damage from the fall, and Rufus gets very frustrated because he was hoping that she could tell him something about Elysium. While venting this frustration, he does mention Elysium and she seems to come to a little bit. Goal initially confuses Rufus for her fiance Cletus, and when Rufus tells her that he's not Cletus, she advises him to contact Cletus to see if they can get back to Elysium. Of course, Rufus being Rufus, this gesture of goodwill did need a bribe, but he does eventually agree. Rufus, after several puzzles to unlock the long-range radio, does in fact contact Cletus, who turns out to not seem too concerned with Goal's health so much as being returned to him for an unknown reason. Rufus, being the ever-so-selfless guy that he is, decides the only way he will return Goal to Cletus is if Cletus agrees to take him to Elysium with him. And this is where you start to see the sheer selfishness that Rufus is going into this situation with. At any rate, a deal is struck and the two agree to meet at the Lower Ascension station the next night. Rufus goes to retrieve Goal, but is tricked by C-3PO with crunk teeth and put in jail for all of his crimes while he was trying to get the materials together to wake Goal up in the first place. Keep in mind, a lot of the content that was skipped was Rufus doing a lot of fucked up shit to people, so this is honestly justified. However, at the same time, it turns out Bailiff Argus from the Organon Cruiser is also in Kuvak, so Rufus decides it's pertinent to break out of jail, which he does so easily, find Goal, and start making his way to the meetup point with Cletus. We fade into the second act. The second act doesn't impact the story at all besides meeting Doc, a brain implant specialist who will come into play in part 3. Basically, Rufus fixes a mind bike to get up to the meetup faster because Goal is too heavy for him to keep carrying. Otherwise, it's just puzzles for puzzle's sake and nothing really worth covering. We get to part 3 and this is where the story actually gets good. Rufus leaves an unconscious Goal in a candy shop to go meet Cletus himself, suspicious of Cletus's motives. Unbeknownst to Cletus, Rufus does find him and sees the Organon are with him. Rufus overhears them plotting together to prepare for Deponia's destruction with the Organon's leader, Prime Controller Ulysses, and that Goal is only needed for the codes inside of her defective implant. It's at this point we learn Rufus and Cletus look nearly identical, though it's never explained why. For that matter, neither is the reasoning for blowing up Deponia. It's just a plot device that's there. At any rate, Rufus dresses up as Cletus to get past the Organon forces in secret, while simultaneously Cletus is waiting on the platform in secret, expecting Rufus to arrive with Goal. Of course, Goal is left in the candy shop unattended, so this didn't happen. As the two come face to face, Cletus demands to know where Goal is. Rufus refuses to tell him, saying that he overheard the conversation between himself and the Organon. At this point, Cletus comes clean and says that there's nothing Rufus can do to stop the impending doom on Deponia. Rufus still believes that Cletus will allow him to go to Elysium, using Goal as leverage. Cletus is confused, wondering why a native of Deponia would allow it to be blown up. At this point, Rufus delivers probably one of the most sincere, heartfelt things I think he's ever said, when he describes how much he hates Deponia and wishes to leave it just like his father. This was actually a ruse by Rufus to convince Cletus to give him the backup, which would allow him to get past the Organon security forces and return to Goal. Cletus does so, and Rufus returns to the candy shop, only to find that Goal is missing and a trail of glowing goo on the ground. Rufus follows the trail to an old trawler owned by a man named Captain Bozo. In the trawler, along with Captain Bozo, is Doc, the brain implant specialist from earlier, who offers to help him repair Goal's implant. Once the implant is repaired, Rufus inserts it back into Goal's head and brings her up to speed after she awakens. Goal is disgusted by what she heard and tells Rufus that they need to go together to confront Cletus on the platform. The pair confront Cletus and appear to have ruined his plan by more or less giving him a wedgie and raising him up a flagpole. But then Cletus does something unexpected and tells Goal what Rufus said to him when Rufus was trying to obtain the backup cartridge. Goal asks if this is true and is absolutely livid. Around this time, the Organons show up and more or less tell Rufus that he can replace Cletus and go to Elysium with Goal and her backup memories installed. At this point, Goal would have no recollection of the events that occurred and would legitimately believe that Rufus was Cletus. Rufus agrees and does implant the false memories into Goal, and the pair set off for Elysium, Goal none the wiser of what had happened. But eventually, surprisingly, Rufus's conscience catches up to him, and he ends up coming clean to Goal about everything. Goal, understandably, is very upset, and the pair return to Deponia. When the pair lands, Rufus sets off to retrieve Goal's true implant. Although he does so successfully, he encounters Cletus and Argus on his way back. Cletus and Argus force Rufus to hand back the false memory cartridge. So Rufus hands over an implant, and Cletus ascends to Elysium with Goal, seemingly victorious. Argus and the Organon prepare to deal with Rufus, but Rufus escapes to Captain Bozo's trawler with the remaining implant. In the end, Rufus tells Bozo that the fate of Deponia is out of his hands, and the frame cuts to the implant that he still has, which have the words "backup" written on it, indicating that in the end, Rufus did the right thing and ensured Goal would have her true memories, despite the fact that she set off with Cletus back to Elysium. From this ending, it can be inferred that Deponia would in fact not be blown up, as Goal would know the truth and would be able to report to the Elysian High Council what the actual findings were. In this way, Rufus sacrificed everything that he wanted in the end to ensure that Deponia wasn't destroyed, which, given the character that we'd seen from Rufus up to this point, was not only surprising, it was damn near admirable. But with that out of the way and the story done, let's get to our rating. So overall, especially towards the end, the story was great. There's a few plot holes and a bit of dialogue that didn't really translate well from the original German. But overall, the plot was there, it was entertaining enough, you had solid character development. Other than that, that's about all this game had. The graphics I felt were okay for their time. The audio, there's just no excuse for. Anything released past 2008 should have had high definition audio to it, and this just didn't. Most of the playthrough reminded me of those old Flash games that you would play when you're in the computer lab in school back in the day. And even then, I'm fairly certain some of those had better technical development than this game did. The vast majority of this game was point and click mechanics, and even that felt clunky somehow. For a company that had been around for half a decade by the time they released this game, I would have expected better development, or at the very least, more careful consideration of the quality of their product. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt for the sequels, but as far as the intro to what was a planned trilogy at the time, I'm not impressed. The game just simply hasn't aged well, and for that reason, I'm going to give it a K rating of 2 out of 5. The story was there, everything else just wasn't. Either way, thank you guys for hanging out with me for another edition of Forgotten Library, Games You've Never Played. I'm Crash Landicoot. If you liked the video, please like, comment, subscribe. It does help the channel out greatly. If you didn't like the video, let me know in the comments. Let me figure out how I can improve in the future. Until then, take care, y'all. I'll see you next time.